quite an old myth or theory that I definitely heard when I was a teen and starting to get into fitness. I remember being told and reading in books that if I ate carbs late at night or in the evening when I was close to going to bed and being inactive, all of those carbs were going to be stored as body fat.
I would go so far as to say that when I was in my early teens, there were fitness people saying that you shouldn't even have dinner after 6 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah.
You should never eat late. Carbs were often mentioned, but some even said, don't eat after 6 o'clock. No matter if you wake up at 5 o'clock, never eat after 6 o'clock because the circadian rhythm of the body will make you fat.
Yeah, and that you're not going to move and spend all that energy. So definitely a plausible mechanism. And today's study did look into this in a fairly meticulous manner. And I mean, I love studies looking into this type of things that is something of a hassle. Because if it's not important, then we can discard this. Because I mean, I skipped meals as a teen because it was too late in the evening and I thought about this rule. I mean, if it turns out to be important, then at least we know that. So, study, they were gonna investigate, do evening carbohydrates make you more fat than not eating carbs in the evening? And does it matter what type of carbs you eat, fast or slow carbs? Yeah. And we are going to Cyprus. Is that how you pronounce it in English? Cyprus. Cyprus. The research team in Cyprus, what was I don't remember the university name. They recruited 42 healthy and fairly well-trained individuals that they split into 3 different groups that were going to follow different meal plans and a training protocol for 4 weeks. So that's not a huge amount of time, but they did. Sometimes researchers make these a priori calculations to see how many participants do we need to find a statistical difference of the effect size that they anticipate. And 42 participants for 4 weeks was well within that range. So it's enough to see or to find, probably enough to find the differences they were looking for. And these 3 groups, they were placed on diets with the same macronutrient content in all the 3 groups. So macronutrients are carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and alcohol, but usually they don't include alcohol.
That's so weird.
In meal plans and studies like these. Their diets were fairly similar, same macronutrients. They had 20% of their energy come from protein, 60% of the energy came from carbs, and 20% of the energy came from fat, which is a fairly common distribution. The protein is a bit high if you compare it with the general population, but for trained people, 20% protein is kind of common. It put the participant at around 1.5 grams of protein per kilo per day. So that's a pretty nice level to be at. They could bump it up slightly and get slightly better muscle gains, probably. But anywho, they did distribute these nutrients or these meals slightly differently. All of the groups had 5 days a week, they did evening workout. And one of the groups had all of their carbs during the day before that evening workout and had no carbs after. They ate some proteins and fats afterwards, but no carbs. The 2 other groups, they ate 60% of their carbs before the evening workout and the other 40% after the evening workout in their dinner meal. And in addition, those 2 groups that ate carbs after the workout, they were split up into they had 2 different carb sources. One high GI, glycemic index, and one low GI, or in other terms, fast and slow carbs. So the low GI or the slow carbs, examples of what they ate were brown rice, whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta. And the high GI or fast carb group ate white rice, white bread, and white pasta. So the tasty stuff. And the group that didn't eat carbs after the workout, they had a keto meal instead of chicken and some greens, while the carb groups, they had that plus their carb allotment. And they were training 5 times per week. 3 of those workouts were full body strength training sessions, and 2 of them were high intensity interval training sessions where they did 10 bouts of 1 minute running. So almost sprint interval training. Yeah. Always in the evening and always supervised exercise. But the diets, they weren't supervised and they didn't receive the meals, but they did have quite frequent check-ins and fairly good adherence and compliance. plans.
So the participants, they got instructions on how to eat, how to prepare their meals, and then they self-reported back to the scientists.
Probably a bit of lying going on and miscalculations, but my guess is that it would be close enough.
I think it's a strength that the study only lasted for like a month when it comes to the adherence here. Because if you were going to put these participants on this diet for a year, I would expect to see a lot more lying going on, a lot less adherence. But if you sign up for a study like this, you're probably highly motivated to try to be a good student.
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. No way to know for sure, but I like this study design.
Yeah. So they did a bunch of measurements to try and figure out what difference did it make to skip the evening carbs or to get to eat them. So before and after the 4 weeks, they measured body fat percentage using two different methods. One was skin fold measurements, when you use a caliper to measure the thickness of the fat folds. And they also used one of those BIA scales, bioelectric impedance analysis, where you step on a scale and it runs an electric current through your body and analyzes what you consist of. And skin fold measurements and the bioelectric impedance analysis, they have around the same margin of error or standard deviation when it comes to determining which body fat percentage you're at. So you have to take those numbers with a grain of salt, but they're pretty good at tracking differences in body fat. So say if one of those measurements say that you have a body fat percentage of 25, that number might really be between like 20 to 30. But if it says that you have an increase, that you over 4 weeks increase your body fat percentage of 3 to 4%, that is probably in the right neighborhood of the change. And they also tested some performance markers. They tested their jump height, their VO2 max, so their cardio fitness, and their strength, and the hack squat, machine bench press, machine shoulder press, and the lat pull down. So, to the results. According to the lore from yours and mine youths, this would make quite a difference. I mean, these people, they were diligent. No carbs in the evening, no carbs after working out. They did everything right, so if the myth holds up or the theory holds up, we would see a difference in fat loss or in fat gain among these participants.
And what a difference we saw.
No, we didn't. Let's go over the numbers.
Yeah.
If we begin by looking just at the body weight, so the total body weight, that decreased slightly over the 4 weeks in all three groups. They lost around 1.5 pounds or 0.6 kilos of total body weight. But out of that body weight, they lost 3 pounds of fat mass or 1.5 kilos. And they gained 2 pounds of lean mass, so mostly muscle mass, or 1 kilo. And there was no difference between the groups. Carb timing didn't matter, and I skipped those evening carbs in my teens for nothing.
I did not, and I got fat.
Okay, so the jury is still out.
Yeah, the jury is still out. No, I overate. And that seems to be the main result here.
We'll get back to that point about evening carbs. They're often different than the morning carbs.
But can we talk a minute about that they built muscle and lost fat at the same time?
Exactly.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it almost passes like without notice, or you almost take it for granted. And still, this is something that is debated, that it can't happen in someone with training experience. And these people, they had been training for a minimum of 2 years.
I would say kudos goes out to supervised training sessions once again.
Yeah.
These participants, they were forced to exert themselves in the gym under supervisions of the researchers. So they probably had their best training period in a while.
Yeah. And pushed themselves harder and got better results. This is a strong case for having a trainer or a coach. I mean, and that person doesn't have to know more about training than you. They just need to have like a whistleblower.
Yeah, and hold you accountable.
Yeah, exactly.
It looks like you're slacking.
Yeah.
Stop slacking, dude.
But my answer to that is that I don't know if I want to train that hard. So I'm not going to get a coach. Seems like a lot of work.
Absolutely.
They did also increase their VO2 max. This is the second episode in a row that we talk about VO2 max. Yeah. That is not a common occurrence in this podcast. They were quite fit at the onset, they had a VO2 max of 47 milliliters of oxygen per kilo and minute at the beginning of the study, and they increased that by 10%, up to 52 in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And this reminds me of the study we talked about last week. I think it was last week, wasn't it?
Yep.
Where fairly unhealthy people exercised for 1 year, and they had a 10% increase at a much lower level. And we talked in that episode about how that was kind of small gains, which we see now when people can replicate that in a month. So yeah, that's the thing. And there were no difference in gains in VO2 max between the carb groups, and no difference in jumping height gains or strength gains. All groups increased to a similar extent. The carb timing didn't matter. So we also kind of got a hint that it wasn't important in this type of training protocol to get carbs in after the workout. That it sorted itself out just fine. And well, if you're getting to the takeaways and practical applications, like the authors say themselves, the overall amount of daily intake of carbohydrates is more important than timing. When it comes to body composition and, well, at least performance in this setting, there are performance instances where it matters, but for most people's regular training, it doesn't matter a whole lot. They also make a little jib at protein intake that the same goes for protein and for carbs. The total daily intake is more important than how you distribute it. So that's nice. I like it when we don't have to worry about details.
Absolutely. This is another nail in the coffin for people who says that the timing, no matter what macronutrient we are talking about, matters so much.
Yeah. And also, I mean, they had similar results in muscle gain and in fat mass lost. It simply didn't matter. And what we've seen in other research is that when it comes to losing fat or building muscle, the total caloric intake during the day or during the week or whichever time period you look at is the most important factor for fat loss. And for muscle gain or muscle retention, if you are on a hard diet, protein is the most important macronutrient, and also strength training to keep that muscle on your body.
Yeah. And there will probably always be edge cases, like if you eat one huge meal every other day and through that meal are able to get all the calories you need, that's probably not optimal for gaining strength and muscle mass. If you're not an edge case, don't worry too much about it.
Yeah, exactly. And also that carbs themselves aren't inherently fattening. You could go on a zero carb diet or a high carb diet and probably get similar results. Once again, might be some edge cases.
If you're only living on pasta and pizza, and we're not talking about pizza that has like half a pound of meat on it or something like that, it's going to be harder to reach your protein goals. Flour contains proteins, sort of like 10% dry weight is protein, but still going to be hard to reach those 1.5, 2.0 grams per kilo body weight if you're only living on very carbohydrate-rich sources.
Yeah, so I mean, in these people's meal plan, 20% of the energy came from protein, and they ended up at 1.5 grams per kilo. So if your food choices don't average 20% of the energy, not the total amount from protein, then you're going to land short on that. Well, and I also quickly want to mention that someone might wonder, well, if carbs and the carb timing isn't important for weight loss, then what is important? And some of these strategies that are very effective for weight loss, if you don't want to count calories, which is probably the most effective method, but it's also extremely boring and tedious. Well, a good strategy is to eat foods that are filling, that you're less prone to overeat, they're often nutritious, and they are often less processed, closer to their naturally occurring state, but not always, but it correlates quite a bit. So those are like the big points. But it's for a lot of people, it's a good idea to try out calorie counting, I think, for at least a few days.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the fact that while it might not be negative eating carbs in the evening per se, the food choices might differ a bit.
Yeah, I thought about that too, because we know from other studies and stuff that people that tend to be late night snackers,
Yeah, like observational studies.
yeah, they tend to make worse food choices. But I also think it has to do with, in this study, they were told how much to eat.
Yeah.
So they knew how many calories they were going to get. So the issue isn't taking a snack late at night if you have some calories you need to get in. The issue is taking the snack late at night when you've already gotten the calories you need.
Yeah, and I think there's another difference too, because if you're eating carbs late at night, those carbs are more often going to be ice cream or potato chips. But if you eat carbs in the morning, that might be whole wheat bread.
I don't know what you're talking about, man.
So I think the choices of food might differ.
Absolutely. We all make the best choices late on a Saturday evening.
Yeah, when like we're depleted of willpower.
Maybe we have some
I
beer
think that
in
might
our
have
bellies.
been. Yeah, exactly. I think that depletion of willpower might have been debunked. I'm not sure. But it's plausible that we have like a more mental fatigue, and that might affect our choices or our power to resist urges that we might be able to resist in the morning.
Yeah.
All right, so good to lay that to rest for what it's worth. It's one study. I don't know if there are more studies on done like this. I don't think so. But still, I like what I'm seeing.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, the researchers in the paper, they were fairly certain that this was the first study of its kind.
Yeah, it was a nice study. I will accept that it was only 4 weeks.
Me too.